This is the 6th day of the February 88 7-day retreat. The first question we will look at is that of guilt. Which I think is a universal feeling of human beings the world over and throughout all times. And it's been brought up in meetings. It is with all of us at one time or another, maybe not in the surface consciousness, but in below surface consciousness. Feeling of guilt. What is it? It's a feeling, vague or not so vague, that one has done something wrong. Which also, there's something, maybe something vague, one may not be quite sure what it is that one did wrong, or one can remember very clearly what it is that one has done wrong. Having hurt somebody, having damaged someone or something, having done violence, and either the incident is remembered, it may have been yesterday or years ago or long time ago. One may remember incidents from one's childhood. Or one may not remember any particular incident. And then there's this vague shadow of guilt for wrongdoing. As one person described it as a dark ball rolling in on maybe a present state of well-being or inner transparency, and there rolls this dark shadow of guilt and having done wrong. Very often connected with this feeling, but not necessarily, is the fear of being found out, being confronted about what one has done. Something covered up or secretive about it, a feeling of that sort. And if one was to be found out, there would be some kind of disaster. sometimes if one in one's thoughts could imagine that there was no possibility of being found out, one may not feel half as guilty. But if one has been raised very early in one's life with a belief that God sees everything, even if mom and dad don't, God sees, then where is one going to hide? I remember the picture book that I used to carry around. I liked fairy tales and picture books a lot. And the pictures I can still see now as though I was looking at these books. And one were biblical stories. And that picture in which Adam and Eve are hiding behind a tree. So that God would not see what they did, would not find them. But he's there in the picture. Very impressed with that there was no place to hide. And the fear too, the fear of this angry God, made angry if one did something wrong, if one betrayed his trust that one was going to be good. So there are the very, very early incidents in our life of having done things which displeased the gods surrounding us, which were our parents. You say, why call them gods? But to a child there is omnipotence and omniscience to parents. At least at a certain age. We may not remember this, but parents to a tiny one can do anything. And they seem to know everything. Or almost everything. And all of us, having innumerable, uncountable times incurred the displeasure of our parents for either what we did or for just being there in a state in which parents were upset over other things, depressed or at the end of their rope, exasperated, unnerved. So then that may have been something that one did or said, or just being in the way may have been the last straw. And maybe for a little child out of the blue sky, totally unexpectedly and understandably, rained down some thunderstorm, abuse, maybe being scolded. I call that abuse. Not judgmentally, but how it can be perceived. Although a child may not feel abused, it is not a good word. A child doesn't understand. The first time it's scolded, it doesn't understand. How could it understand? Scolded or slapped or punished in some way. Told no in very harsh ways, or I'm not saying it's always so, but there is a first time when it is so. That is how the child doesn't know what is right doing and wrong doing. It only feels either the pain of being hit, the pain of the harsh words, and the pain of the stern, angry looks. That is must be immediately registered by the child. Seen and registered. There. Since children still have this capacity to what seems to forget, to be into something again once the crying is over. Parent has gotten out of that mood. We think they forget, but the brain registers and remembers. That's its function. And the next time there is an angry look or a shouting, the association is easily made that I've done something again. It's me. Because one is told, eventually one learns what is right and wrong, and one may either unintentionally do it again, or intentionally to cause anger to the parents as an act of revenge, or not be aware that one has done anything, and maybe not have done anything, and just conclude, the brain through its associative mechanisms, conclude that the anger of the parent is the fault of me. I think it must be out of this associative mechanism of the brain, and also a repressive mechanism, that memories, even though they are registered, can be repressed, capsuled off, not made accessible to the general network of thinking and feeling and emoting. Some kind of short-circuiting taking place in the brain to short-circuit a memory which is too painful to live with. And yet it's there. It may have some kind of ways of sending responses, but not available to any conscious understanding. So out of all of this may come this often so utterly vague feeling of having done wrong, having been in the wrong, having hurt, offended, brought about sadness in the parent or other people. And the ominousness of that feeling, because to a little child a punishment or harsh word can spell utter danger of not surviving that. And as we all know, it's coming to light more and more, and many children who do not survive the anger of their parents. So it's not an altogether unjustified fear in a small human being that it may die, not live through this, be annihilated, destroyed. And even though it happens in rare cases, that fear is still there. Fear of doom, of being destroyed, of not living through something, or of just imminent, ununderstood potential danger at the sight of a angry, or maybe just somewhat angry or moody looking parent or adult, because other adults may come to stand for the parent. The brain associates through contiguity, things happening at the same time, at the same space, are associated. This is what the conditioned response is all about. The dog salivating at the sound of the bell, not when the meat is there, but when the bell has been rung, that has been associated in time, proximity with the food. Bell with food. And then the guilt feelings about things we remember having done and wish we hadn't done them. Or maybe at the time we wanted to do something and later feel bad about it. Remorseful, guilty. Again, worrying whether we have blown it with a person, whether that person will still like us, will be forever angry at us, or whether there will be retribution from higher powers that one has learned to believe in. In looking at our life, which is representative of human life, not just zeroing in on the personal aspects of it, which are different for each individual, but seeing one's life as representative of human life, life of a human being. Now, and going back to the ancient past, I think one could say, without any exaggeration, that we've done everything under the sun, we human beings, to ourselves and to each other, all of us, at one time or another, either actually or in our imagination. Out of feelings of danger, fear, anger, wanting, jealousy, envy, disappointment, exasperation, or just plain inattention, unawareness, wrapped upness in this whole self process, me, my needs, my desires, my, and so forth. Does that make sense? Can one agree with that? Not take it over, think about it, reflect upon it. Whether, no matter who we are, where we are, when we are or were, we've done all kind of things. If not oneself, then one's parents. If not directly, then in one's dreams. Wishful thinking. And what we don't even remember. I can't remember how I was day after day, moment to moment with our son when he was little, growing up. But I'm sure there must have been innumerable times when some hurt or damage was done or could have been done. I can't even remember it. How can one remember if one was inattentive or taken up with something else? The mind taken up with something else. And if one thinks about it and sees around one the consequences, namely how we all act so often, so irrationally, so conditioned, so neurotically. We ourselves have brought that about. We've done it to ourselves and to each other. No one out there has done it, it's ourselves. Because our parents too were children at one time. And their parents also were children at some time. And what is done to oneself, if it is not completely seen and aired and understood, will be passed on automatically if the mind is not aware and clear at the moment of anger or irritation. So can one feel, be in touch with the real sadness, call it tragedy, of what we have done and are doing to ourselves and each other unawares or intentionally. And the continuation of hurt and damage in those who are hurt and not immediately aware so the thing can be done with, finished, does not carry on into further action. We usually brood over individual instances in our life, are burdened by the guilt over them. But can one feel the general sadness of what we do to ourselves and each other? Not with feelings of guilt. Guilt means I may be found out. I may not be liked for this. I may have retribution coming to me. I should have done different. If only I had. These endless loops that thoughts perform in the brain, and activating all the while the emotions of anxiety, self-deprecation, violence. But just be with the sadness of it. Not run away from it, not try to escape from it. It's a fact. And also come to a clear understanding that if the mind is wrapped up in feelings of guilt, which are very demanding, they absorb the attention. There's not really attention. They absorb the mind, they fill it endlessly. We talked about the thought loops going around and around and around. At that moment, again, there is no openness and attention, and we may do precisely the same thing over that we feel guilty about having done in the past. Can one see that? That in order not to perpetuate, the mind needs to be clear, fairly clear. Let's not say perfectly clear. There's no perfection in this. Insightful into what causes damage and hurt. As to the vagueness of the feeling, this shadowy doom hovering over one if one. And one thing about that is one may now do something, be criticized for it, be told that one has done wrong, and immediately that connects with this cloud of doom, of past guilts. And a thing right now which can be, the mistake can be corrected, one can say one is sorry, one can be done with it, but it is connected with this whole mood of danger, self-deprecation, self-unworth. how are these associative links to be seen? Because if they're not seen, they operate, they function. Is it possible to become aware of that? How this links with that? How the thoughts jump and the emotions and feelings are aroused in connection? Can there be perception of that, insight into that, awareness of that as it happens? We're coming back to that all the time. One person says, yes, it's possible. But just that somebody says, yes, it's possible, one can't just take that over and use it, can one? One has to see for oneself and watch, look, be aware as hurt happens, or as, the response is about to come out to hurt someone. It's not just attending to little things, the attention also being broad at the same time. There being an openness, which is the openness of not being stuck in what I want, what I'm afraid of, what I should be like or want to become or want to be seen as. These are these narrow channels in which there is no broad vision at all. Can there be awareness of traveling in a narrow channel? Yes, there can be. The mind can be transparent to itself as possible. And then a response can be seen as it arises and does not have to come to expression, regardless of what some psychotherapy says, that express everything is good for you. Don't hold it in. Well, we're not saying hold it in, we're saying see it. And the seeing is the end of the need of expression. And without any controlling mechanism called into action. Seeing is not controlling, it's seeing. What we did in the past has been done. It cannot be changed. It's history, it's memory. No matter how much we think about it and would like to change it, it's happened. One can make up, do penance, say one is sorry, make amends. But it doesn't change what has been done. It may make one feel better. But will one do the same thing over? That's the big question. Will the absorption in guilt feelings cloud the vision? Or will one see what clouds the vision and look freely, with the energy gathering not in guilt, penance, confession, and repentance, but in what's going on now? In oneself and with each other in relationship. As we may struggle to be with each other, to understand each other, to love each other. Love is not a struggle. Love has no effort. comes the moment this occupation with self-concern, this compulsion, slows down, abates, becomes silent. Then there may be love, which does no harm. Love cannot do harm. With this we come to another question that was asked. You talk so much about the self. Its dangers, how harmful it is. Implying all kinds of things, how good it would be without it. Does all this talk about the self, which then raises thoughts in us about the self, in fact create the self, strengthen it? And the suggestion was made, why don't you talk differently about the self? Point out that it is nothing, it's not real, that it is an illusion. Maybe that would be helpful. So one wouldn't build up this sense of self through listening to your talks. I remember long ago, maybe having just for a year been associated with a Buddhist training center, riding in the car with somebody who was obviously very concerned about herself, her capacities and talents, also her beauty, a very beautiful woman, ambitions. And she said, this is what I like about the teachings of Buddhism. Self is an illusion. I didn't know at all how to respond at the time, but something seemed to be awry. What words, this is what we have to ask ourselves all the time. What words are helpful to point to something beyond themselves, to something that is actually going on? And what words are not helpful? Build something up. Build images up that may not have been there before. I think first of all one has to always be clear and mention it and see it for oneself as the listener, that the word that is used to describe or point to something is not what is pointed at. The image is not the real thing. So, how are we talking and how are we listening? Are we getting involved in the words, in the intellectual understanding of it, in the visualization of the images that may be aroused or used, and stay on that level? Then obviously the more talks one hears, the more words are used, the more memory is built up. Ideas and images. And that's why, I don't know how it was put by Wang Po, as soon as the mouth opens, all manner of evil springs forth. Maybe it wasn't like that, but this is how I remember it. Talking is dangerous. Saying things, putting things into words, has inherent danger in it. Danger of taking the word literally or remaining on the verbal level and making dogma out of the words that are heard and remembered. Or hearing the words in terms of one's own preconceptions, prejudices, or misunderstanding them, fitting them into what one thinks is so, twisting them, not intentionally. The mind does that. Yesterday we were talking about discovering an inner voice, an inner command that says, be attentive, be aware. And something to the effect of, hear that voice, be aware of it, was said. Somebody said, you said we should listen to our inner voice, which is quite different. We should listen to our inner voice means pay attention to that and follow it. That is not what was said at all. It was said, be aware of the fact that this thing exists, is going on, and not be caught up in the content of it and respond to it obediently. It is true, most of what is talked about is about this deep-seated conviction that we human beings have of being a separate individual. And our attachment to that separate individuality with its capacity and talents, and on the one hand, and its ideas about itself, its opinions and knowledge, image about its good looks, and all the opposite of that. Attachment to the image of being stupid, ugly, not talented, not as capable as others, and so forth. That's what we talk about most of the time, because it is felt deeply that this indeed may lie at the root of all of our difficulty in relationship, on a small level and on a global level. This attachment to the conviction that there is a separate individuality to be maintained, enhanced, thought about, dreamt about, projected into the future, attached to its past, in memory, and so forth. That's what we talk about most of the time. Does that create this for us because we talk about it? Or does it reveal it? One may have never thought in those terms before. Some people who come freshly to a talk of this nature, on this topic, sometimes say it's the most radical, earth-shaking thing that I've ever heard. Something seems to be cracking up. Never seen it this way, never thought about it this way. We don't We may have heard it so often that it becomes sort of old felt hat. How many more times am I going to hear that? Is she going to talk about that? But if one hears it freshly, that also happens, that somebody will say, today you said something that made sense, I could see it. And one had said it maybe at least 100 times before. But that's the beauty of it. It is like a fit, a perfect fit. When the listening and the talking are one, that there's no gap, nothing in between this. We say and hear and see the same thing at the same time. Then there's understanding. And that is completely new and astonishingly fresh. And has nothing to do with memory of having heard that 100 times. That memory doesn't even play into this. That memory is an abeyance. That's why one hears something freshly, sees something. Yeah, it is so. And yet there's no denying the fact that the more we think about ourselves, make images out of ourselves, how we are. She talks about jealousy or envy or violence, guilt. So now maybe I feel guilty. One may sort of like sometimes being with a sick person, one suddenly has also the flu or the cough. One takes it on. But this is thinking and imagining. It's not looking. And as to whether this self is an illusion or not, whether it is real or not, what is it? How does it manifest? That's observable. That's none of these words are perfect. We've tried to approach it differently with our limited ways of putting it. Maybe if a poet sat here, he could say it better. Find new words. To hear how one talks about oneself. To see how one thinks about oneself. To see the image that one has of oneself. And the power of that to affect our actions, our interrelationship. The power of the image to feel hurt, deeply hurt, and the revenge or urges for revenge coming out of that hurt image. At the same time building an image of the one who said the hurtful thing. So, image battling image. That's what we call the activity of self. It's not illusory, it's taking place. Palestinian children, since they've been born, have been heard what the Israelis have done. They may not never have seen an Israeli before, but they have an image of them. And Israelis have an image of themselves and of the surrounding people who are trying to get them out. And when the guns and stones go off, they fly at images. Having lived through a catastrophic piece of history in Germany, which is not restricted to the Germans, it is universally possible for all human beings, Holocaust, etc. Having lived there during these years of Hitler regime, anti-Semitism, and seeing how image making was used. I think I've mentioned it before in a talk, when in our biology books there was always a heavy chapter on race, because every opportunity had to be taken to indoctrinate the children about the Nordic race and the Jews. Then there would be a photograph of a blonde youth, male or female, with high forehead and a bush of blonde hair, blue eyes. No, the books were not in color, they were black and white. And next to it, a cartoon of a Jew with a crooked nose, certain features, which became implanted in us. One could tell a Jew if one saw one. And many one didn't tell because they didn't look like that. It's always amazing to me, still with this heavy conditioning, to see in-depth news pictures of Israel, and see some blonde Jews, some Jews who don't look like Jews. I'm half Jewish myself, and yet this deep conditioning took place, what Jews look like. So with this image formation, we make it possible to arouse hatred and violence. That is not illusory, it's happening. And yet, can one see that a thought or an image is just that? It's not a human being. It's not life. Life cannot be forced into any image. That's the beauty of it. It defies all image making because it's alive. It's not static. It's not crystallized. It's flowing, moving, and ever freshening and refreshening if the mind is open to touch it, to be touched by it. When it is not attached to its petty images. Two questions remain. I'll just take one briefly, because it may be important. Someone asked it, but I'm asked this frequently, here and there. People saying, you talk about wanting, or the possibility maybe being free of want. What do you want out of what you're doing? Why are you doing this? You mean to say you don't want something out of this? And connected with this question was a side question. How can you do this work, people coming, asking you questions, meeting with you, listening to your talks, sitting around you? and this not sooner or later end up in spiritual pride or pride? I think it's an important question to ask. And it's good if people feel free to ask these questions. Because this way we can air and aerate. They say the dirtiest water, sewage water, if it is blown high up into the air and then allowed to trickle into the ground, then it purifies itself. The light, the sun, the air, and the trickling through the darkness of the ground, of the earth, purifies water. Why I'm doing what I'm doing? Is there wanting involved? What occasion is there for wanting when we just get together? People come and we talk, we meet, we sit together. That's what's happening. And in this happening there is tremendous energy and joy and love. What could there be wanting? When going on a vacation, we will be going next week to visit our children in Colorado. I don't think much of this place. I don't mean I don't think anything of it in terms of devaluating, but then there is what's going on there, and it takes all of one's being. It's a different kind of life as here in a retreat. And then sometimes coming back and realizing the first thing is a talk. One wishes one could delay that. It's the thought about it. What am I going to talk about? In retreat it's much easier because there are all these questions and we're in the most intimate of touch with each other. Coming back, sitting, and there's people coming for a talk. There's sometimes one doesn't want to do it. But then as the thing starts, then words come, and it's all right. Sometimes when we've faced some difficulties in the growth of the center, maybe financial or membership dropping, and trustees sort of wrinkling their foreheads, wondering how this is all going to work out, then looking and checking it within, it always seemed one can participate in the worry. It goes very easy if one just thinks we may not have enough money or not enough members or so. Then on that level one can be swept up in communal worrying. But actually looking at what goes on, if nobody wants to do this thing, then we won't do it. It's not that I would go around and put posters on trees. Come and see me. We're in this thing together, and if no one wants to do it, then I don't know what happened. How can I tell? But living is such a indescribably precious thing, no matter where one is, what one is doing. And as for the pride, people coming, sitting around you or asking you questions, see, that may be one of the reasons that the eyes are closed, not see people sitting around. We're talking together, directly. The concerns are not yours, they're mine too. They're our mutual common concerns. And the looking, it's not an exhortation, a wagging finger, you better look or be attentive. We all have to look. If looking isn't taking place here, there's not going to be a talk. And if looking does take place here, as it does, what is there to be proud of? When one sees what goes on in the human being, in the human mind, in the human past, if anything, there comes a genuine feeling of humility. Like we said earlier, there's nothing under the sun we haven't done to ourselves and each other at one time or another, and may do at any time if there's not the openness of looking and questioning. All right, one may see one's picture in the paper, which happened recently. Does that arouse pride? Maybe one feels good for a moment. But when the mind is open and questioning, one sees what happens. And why get carried away with something like this? It's not worth it. And one sees that. And if there's the listening to the wind and the sounds of people around one, why would the energy go into thinking about being in the paper? Would be sad if this is what one would hang on to, or even though if somebody says that this was a good talk, it feels good, because something may be happening. But if nobody says it was a good talk, then that's all right too. If somebody says you're talking too fast, you're saying too many things, then this is important. Maybe, if I remember it, I can talk slower. Maybe not crowd one more thing into a talk. See, if we could only drop this idea of this person who talks and everybody else who listens, and realize that this is all of us doing the same thing. Commonly, we're looking at common things. Then a lot of images can go, flush out of teacher, etc. We will end here for today.